Welcome. In this video, we're going to be analyzing verse 34 of Daniel chapter 11. And for this entire video, we're going to be focusing on just one question, and that is, does the little help of Daniel 11:34 refer to the Maccabees? Now, this is a very ancient idea, and we find it in the writings of Hippolytus of Rome in 200 AD, and also in the writings of Porphyry in 250 AD. Before we can answer the question, we need to take a step back and consider the history for a moment. So remember that the Maccabees rise up and fight against the Jewish persecution committed by Antiochus. But in the face of this persecution, there's also another Jewish group that arises, and this group is known as the Wise, in Hebrew Maskalim, and it is to this group that the author of Daniel belongs. And these groups are the polar opposites of each other. The Maccabees believe that violent resistance is necessary to defeat the Seleucids, while the Wise believe in only passive resistance. The Maccabees believe they will only free themselves through human intervention, while the Wise believe they must patiently await for divine intervention. And all of this information is found in verse 33 and 34 of Daniel 11, which reads, quote, "The wise among the people shall give understanding to many for some days. However, they shall fall by the sword and flame and suffer captivity and plunder. When they fall victim, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join them insincerely," end quote. So the contention is that when the verse says when they fall victim, they being the wise, that they shall receive a little help, and this little help is referring to the Maccabees. So many interpreters believe that this verse is showing that Daniel is appreciative of the Maccabean resistance to the Seleucid persecution. But is this the correct interpretation of the text? Well, to answer that question, we're going to have to take a step back and consider our historical timeline. So in 167 BC, we have the abomination of desolation. This is when Antiochus sacrifices a pig in the temple, and thus the temple becomes impure. And it's in response to the abomination of desolation that we have the Maccabean revolt begin. And the Maccabees will fight against the Seleucids, and in 164, the Maccabees actually take back control of the temple and are able to purify it. Now, let's just pause here for a moment and really appreciate this. This small group of Jewish fighters was able to successfully fight back against the power of the Seleucid Empire. It is truly remarkable that the Maccabees were able to defeat this global superpower. So then the obvious question arises, how can Daniel call this significant victory of the Maccabees only, quote, a little help? This is the opposite of little. This is a huge help. How on earth can Daniel refer to the Maccabees as only a little help? Well, to help answer that question, let's consider when the book of Daniel was most likely written. Most scholars are going to say that Daniel wrote between the abomination of desolation in 167 and the purification of the temple in 164. Therefore, Daniel wrote in this 3-year interval. Now, I am going to dedicate a later video just to consider the dating of Daniel, but for now, just take my word for it that the majority of scholars date Daniel between 167 and 164. Now, if that's the case, that means that Daniel was writing before the purification of the temple had taken place, and therefore the Maccabees were most likely still in the early stages of their resistance and hadn't had any significant victories yet. Therefore, it makes sense that Daniel refers to them as only a little help. And this is going to be the first of different theories that we're going to consider. So we're going to call this theory the early days of the Maccabean revolt. And it is argued by Borkum in the following quote. "It is true that the book of Daniel refers to the Maccabees only as a little help for the martyred Hasidim, but this need not be as disparaging a reference as often thought. More probably, it indicates that Daniel was written when the Maccabean resistance had only just begun." End quote. Let's now consider our next theory, which I'm going to call the wise did not advocate violence. So in other words, the reason why Daniel views the Maccabees as only a little help is because Daniel did not approve of their violent techniques. This is nicely summarized in the following passage by Wessels, who writes the following, quote, "It is clear from the book of Daniel that the author did not at all support the violent resistance advocated and practiced by the Maccabees. That kind of violence did not find any support in the book of Daniel. The author is pessimistic about such military resistance, and that resistance is seen only as a little help, Daniel 11:34. Writing in the same vein, we read the following from Murphy, quote, "The reference to a little help in Daniel 11:34 may mean the Maccabees. The phrase is a bit insulting. Nowhere in Daniel are Jews urged to fight the Seleucids. Daniel wants them to remain faithful to Torah and to wait until God defeats Antiochus. Militant resistance to Seleucid rule and to Antiochus's persecution is of little use, for matters are ultimately decided on another level. Okay, having now surveyed these two theories, it's now time to consider the most convincing theory. And that is that when Daniel refers to the little help, he's not referring to the Maccabees at all. Newsom, in her commentary, writes the following, quote, "Are you enjoying this video so far? Do you want to watch the rest of it? Well, the only way for you to do that is to become a patron. The full video is only available to patrons. So click the link in the description below and become a patron today."